One could argue that Hitler's encounters with American German soldiers during World War I shaped his worldview, and it's actually what made him start thinking seriously about politics.
Mm.
So I read Brendan Sims. Brendan Sims, he came out with a Hitler biography maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
Mhm.
It's called Hitler: Global Biography, and I think it's my favorite biography on Hitler. It's really, really, really good. He touches on this topic a lot. Essentially, he makes the case that Hitler, prior to World War I, he was largely apolitical. Like prior to those encounters during the war, the first major political statement that he had ever made was choosing to fight for the German Empire rather than the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Because when he was younger, he referred to himself as a Bavarian, and he always aligned more with Germany than the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But to pull this back a bit, before German troops were even engaging with American troops, they were already fighting, what you would call, in not politically correct terms now, the colored world. They were fighting black soldiers and Indian soldiers from the British and French Empire, leading to a sense that the entire world was out to conquer them. So when they finally engaged German-American troops in combat, many who spoke German as a first language, in their view, even their own kin had joined a global crusade against them. And this deeply impacted Hitler. And I brought up some quotes from the Sims book. On July 17th, 1918, the brigade adjutant Fritz Weidmann wrote that Private First Class Hitler dropped off 2 American prisoners. Who these men were and what Hitler made of the incident at the time are not recorded. We do know, however, how he later interpreted what became a seminal moment in his life and thus in the history of the 20th century. Hitler was convinced that these doughboys were the descendants of German immigrants lost to the fatherland for lack of living space to feed them, who had returned as avengers in the ranks of an unstoppable enemy army. In subsequent speeches, he repeatedly came back to the moment in the midsummer of 1918 when the first American soldiers appeared on the battlefields of France, well-grown men of our own blood whom he had deported for centuries, who were now ready to grind the motherland the motherland itself into the mud. And he adds, this is what Brendan Sims adds, this, then, is where it all began. The preoccupation with Germany's demographic weakness, for which Lebensraum in the East was ultimately to become the only remedy. The respect for and fear of the Anglo-Saxon powers with their apparently infinite spatial, demographic, natural, and economic resources, and the determination to avoid another racial civil war between Anglo-Saxon and Teuton, incited by world Jewry, is, if possible, or to survive, it should a renewed contest prove unavoidable. So what he's saying is that to Hitler, Germany's defeat in the Great War was due to losing the war of epic demographics. So Germany failed to provide prosperity for its excess population, resulting in millions of Germans emigrating around the world. And Germany had missed out on becoming a global power because it failed to keep these racially valuable people at home. So he looked at the historical migration waves, especially those who had left during the religious wars, and concluded that the Germans who emigrated were often the best racial stock. Like these were the people who could survive a long trip to the Americas and find prosperity in a foreign land, starting from abject poverty.
Right.
Thus, the solution became Lebensraum in order to go through this racial healing process. And he didn't think of this theory. This was a geopolitical theory from the late 19th century by I think it was Friedrich Ratzel was the
German geographer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, he had argued that living space for a nation was a a biological requirement due to population pressures, and this would be adopted. Lebensraum would be adopted by German nationalists over the years by many high-ranking German officials, but with Hitler there was like a added racial twist to it.
Yeah, of course. In the mid-1920s, when Hitler wrote Mein Kampf and later his secret second book, he spoke at length about the U.S. in like these very racial terms, and he said that there were tens of millions of Americans that were of German descent, and he called this a new folk community of racially highest value, which is wild. He believed that America had benefited from the immigration of Europe's quote unquote boldest and best, especially Nordic and German types. And, this emigration, he said, trained Europe and its strength while it helped America rise. And Hitler saw the U.S. as like this world empire that was emerging from this infusion of high quality European blood. Again, super speaking about it in very, very racist, ways, but he praised 1924 Immigration Act, in the United States, which set quotas that favored Northern Europeans, especially Germans. And to Hitler, that law confirmed that America saw itself as like a Nordic Germanic state, not a racial melting pot. And he wanted Germany to follow a similar path. He wanted to reject racial mixing and exclude Jews and other groups that he deemed inferior. Hitler and other Nazi leaders, they admired American eugenics programs and racial segregation laws. They thought this was great. They were taking notes. And historians had noted that the Nazis had, studied U.S. restrictions on intermarriage and immigration as literal models for, the things that they would propose later on. And the Nuremberg laws of 1935, which banned marriages between Jews and quote unquote Aryans, that was a direct inspiration from these American precedents, right? From these laws that they were literally taking notes on. And Hitler looked at America and, to a certain extent, the British Empire as these racial empires that should be emulated, right? He thought that Germany could do it too, and actually that he would be able to do it more thoroughly and more ideologically because, of course, master race, all that other bullshit that he spewed. But just like some context for it, right? This is to use a German word, it was the zeitgeist, right? This is, they were taking notes.
Well, I'll add at the same time, Hitler had contempt for German Americans. He had believed that they abandoned their heritage and their racial loyalty by assimilating into American society.
Mm-hmm.
There was a book by Jill Lepores. She quotes Hitler. He said something. So a transplant a German to Kiev, and he remains a perfect German. But transplant him to Miami, and you make a degenerate out of him. In other words, an American, meaning that a German farmer in Eastern Europe could remain racially and culturally intact under German rule.
But as soon as you go to Miami, you just immediately become Florida man, right? It's a pretty funny quote. Pretty funny quote, actually. Yeah, I mean, what you can assume that Hitler was, trying to bring German Americans back to the Reich, right? Trying to pull some of them back.
By the 1930s, most German Americans were several generations removed and had no interest in returning. Plus, they didn't want to import people. Instead, they focused more on the ethnic German communities and mainly in Eastern Europe, but also in Latin America as well. Mm-hmm. Because the U.S. really didn't have a pro-Nazi movement. They had the German American Bund. They had people that they falsely claimed as Nazi sympathizers, like Charles Lindbergh. Right. But they didn't have the Bund was not a huge political power or a super sophisticated institution.
No.
They had 25,000 members, and they had often embarrassed the Nazi regime. So they considered it a liability.
Yeah.
And German diplomats in the U.S. were under strict orders to not stir trouble with the American government. But going back to the kind of the claim that you put a German in, and we can wrap this up after this. Um, Going back to the claim that you put a German in Kiev and he remains German, but you put him in America and he turns American. Well, there's a good reason for that, because American society is better than fucking society in Kiev in the 20th century. It's a higher society. My family is from Kiev,
Mm-hmm.
so I have no problem saying that. They were ethnically cleansed out of Kiev.
Right.
But the, I there was more of a high culture in America than there were in Eastern Europe. You had higher standards of living. You had more people who were educated. You had bigger economy. So they naturally were going to assimilate into that society
Mm-hmm.
because they didn't want to be their German communities could be close knit, but ultimately they would have to assimilate into the dominant Anglo culture to succeed in the long run. They couldn't just create these like German enclaves forever. Um, that would they couldn't just not assimilate at all, because how would they get further in society?